Are you up for this?
There are MCU Marvel Legends figures, and there are animated ones. You can get both. Don't be scared. But if you do get them, you should add Cel-Shading.
That's right, I'm doing animated characters. Just a quick disclaimer, I painted this figure the day before X-Men 97 aired. Last week, I worked on the Infinity Saga Black Widow figure. Captain America the Winter Soldier is one of my favorite MCU movies, so I decided to recreate the movie poster as a display. Check it out if you're interested. For those who've been following my DIY journey, you know I mostly focus on MCU characters and avoid cartoon or animated ones. The main reason is to keep my collection in control. And the other reason is because it's really difficult to capture that cel shading look on a figure. Transforming something from 3D to 2D is not an easy task. This figure has no cel shading applied to it, but it's still super impressive. I love everything about it. It looks like the Wolverine from the animated series. But my goal today is to make it look even more screen accurate by adding cel shading back onto him. Let's deconstruct this figure. There's an FAQ on the paint and brushes I use in the description box below. Overall, this Wolverine figure is perfect the way he is. I have no complaints. Actually, I have one. Maybe it's just my figure, but the unmasked hood piece doesn't lay down flush against the shoulders. I can see that it's sculpted to lay flush, but mine just kinda sit awkwardly. It's not a huge issue, but it does look a little odd. The other minor thing that I don't love is the sculpted arm hair. It works for a 3-dimensional Wolverine, but as a cartoon character, it looks a bit too detailed. And since my goal today is to make it cel-shaded, these arm hair may get in the way. Otherwise, this figure is awesome. They nailed the colors. I love the yellow and especially the blue they used. They are vibrant and they don't look cheap. I've only done a handful of 2D or cartoon figures. The Venom and Symbiote Spider-Man figures are alright. Carnage turned out pretty good, but it's not really cel shading. I also did the Spider-Verse figures, and they were great figures to practice techniques on, since they all have their own unique styles. Spider-Punk has visible paint splatters and brushstrokes all over. The spot is sort of cel shaded, with sketch lines here and there. I would describe Miles as more of a CGI type of cel shading. His highlights has this metallic shine to it. The one that looks the most like traditional cel shading is Spider-Man 2099, but I did use gold paint for his cyber digital effect on his upper torso. With all that said, this is going to be my first true cel shaded figure. I'm nervous, but I feel like I need to take this step. So, hello, this is Ken. I like making things. Whether it's repainting my figures or making diorama displays, I love making things look awesome. My goal is to elevate my figures so they can shine on my display. Join my DIY venture as I ask myself the same question every week. Can I make it? I think if toy companies want to release cel-shaded figures, they have to make them matte. The idea of cel shading is to make all the colors as flat as possible. No gradients, no soft edges. But plastic figures often have this somewhat reflective finish, giving them that 3D shine. It contradicts with the whole 2D look. In order to remove the shine, I gotta paint over the entire figure. I may be wrong, but from my experience, I don't think a matte spray can completely mattify a figure if it's already shiny. Let me know if you have tried it. On the other hand, acrylic paint dries down very matte. It also provides a base layer of paint for the highlight or shading color to grip onto. I find that I have a bit more control with the fine details when there's already a base layer of paint on the surface. Sanding the figure also helps make the paint grip better. I don't sand my figures often, but that is Wolverine. I want to make sure everything is done right. Alright, time to paint. I'm going to start with the lightest color first. It's easier to apply a darker color over a lighter one. So if I do accidentally paint over the black stripes, it would be much easier to add the black stripes back in over the yellow rather than the other way around. Okay, onto the cel shading. I'm going to mix myself a light warm brown. It should only be a shade or two darker than the yellow. Cel shading on the figure seems to be a bit controversial. Some like it, some hate it, and I can see why. When done correctly, cel shading can make a figure look very premium, but when done wrong, the cel shading can become very distracting. It's challenging because cel shading isn't static. It changes or moves depending on the light source or the angle, like how certain highlights and shadows will always be placed on the edges of the silhouette. I believe that is why they added all those random squiggly lines to animated Venom, so there's always a couple of them visible no matter which angle you look at it. But because figures are three-dimensional and we twist and turn the body parts to create dynamic poses, the cel shading will often get broken up into shapes that don't make sense. So the real challenge, in my opinion, is to somehow apply the cel shading in a way that won't get broken up by the joints, like the areas around the armpits. I want the curves to look continuous when I pull the shoulders back. I also want the cel shading to be slightly asymmetrical. If it's too symmetrical, then it'll look like the light is perfectly lit from the center. That's just not very realistic. That said, I also don't want each side to look too drastically different. Then it'll look too intentional and becomes a distraction. The overall goal is to make the cel shading appear natural. It should blend into the figure so our eyes don't notice it. When I look at the figure, my eyes should be drawn to the face, and then maybe the costume or the weapon. My attention shouldn't be drawn to the lines on the legs or the forearms. Another key to cel shading is that the color must be fully opaque. The strokes have to be very clean and crisp. That means I have to go over the cel shading a couple of times to get to full opacity, and use a fine brush to sharpen the edges. I'm going to start with figuring out the overall shapes first, then filling out the color to full opacity, and finish it off by cleaning up the lines. Okay, this is what I've got so far. It's looking alright. Let me work on the blue areas next. While I do love the blue that's already there, the gloves, underwear, and boots are just too glossy to be cel shaded. So I'm going to try my best to mix myself the same shade of blue. I've used this neon blue once before on Symbiote Spider-Man. I love how vibrant it is, but the paint was very sheer. That is why I'm mixing this with the light blue, to give it more opacity and also dull down the intensity a bit. I'm also going to add a touch of this green to shift the blue hue slightly. Alright, let's see. Oh no, the paint is very sheer, but I think the color is pretty spot on. So let me do one thin coat at a time. While I'm painting, let me share my history with Wolverine figures. I actually only had one when I was a kid. I had this one that came with a Jeep. The figure itself was okay. I don't think it came with a masked head, and the claws were not good. The Jeep though was awesome. I know they released a VHS one a few years back. I really wanted that one so badly, but for some reason I thought they were going to release them in stores. I didn't know it was online exclusive, so I missed out on that. I was so bummed, to the point where I blocked it out of my mind. I did not look up any images of the VHS figure when I was doing my research for this video. That is why the cel shading placement is different here. I was basing this more on the original animated series and some screenshots from the new one. I want the cel shading to resemble the shows more and also do it in a way where it feels right to me. That is why I'm placing the blue cel shading in places based on my intuition. Just letting the shapes go naturally rather than thinking and analyzing too much. Hopefully to give it more of an organic look. I just have to make sure I don't move my imaginary light source. I decided the light is slightly to the right, so the shading is a bit more prominent on the left side. Just gotta make sure it's consistent throughout. Alright, look at that. That looks pretty good. I worked on the belt off screen. It's just 2 stripes of dark red going down the sides so the shading connects. Onto the arms. I'm gonna mix a bit of this red with this tan color for the shading on his arms. I don't know if this will turn out right, but it feels weird to leave the arms untouched. Oh no, I don't know how I feel about this. But it's too late to undo. Gotta commit to it now. Be right back. Okay, I think I saved it. I added a very thin coat of just a tan color over it to dull down the redness and make it closer to the skin tone. Let me do the same to this side. I guess the other thing with cel-shading is that once you pick the colors, you kinda have to stick with them and make sure they're the same shade everywhere. All there's left are the black stripes. I have to redefine them and also mattify the texture. I need to do it off screen. I got very courageous and added some thin black lines here and there. I do not recommend doing this unless your hands are very steady. I did spray the figure with the matte spray first, so it's a bit easier to fix mistakes. But even so, there's still a chance that the black paint would stain the surface. Alright, the last thing I'm going to paint here are the claws. In the show, the claws aren't grey or pure white. To me, it's more of a pale blue color. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, but I feel like the claws are blue when they come out. Alright, onto the heads. Starting with the masked one, I'm pretty much repeating the steps from earlier, starting with the lightest color, yellow, and then adding a bit of shading to the left side of the skull. As for the face, let me get rid of that plastic shine first, and then use the same shading color on the left side of his face. According to the reference images, there's a very specific shape the animators use for the face, so I'm gonna mimic that. I worked on the eyes a bit off screen. I extended the outer corners a bit to make them look pointier. They look a little strange up close because the eyes in the mask are on 2 separate layers, but from a normal distance, it's not that obvious. I just find that he looks a little bit more menacing with pointier eyes. We'll see if it works. If not, I'll just cover it up with black paint again. Alright, here it is. I added a few black lines around the mouth. It turned out pretty good. Onto the unmasked head. This one's gonna be tricky, because I can see that they added some shading around the eyes. They did a great job, but since I'm going for a cel-shaded look, I have to remove the shading and make the skin tone as flat as possible. As for the shading, I'm again copying what I see in the reference images. The thing with cel-shading is that it will look weird during the process, and things will only come together near the end of it. Right now the shading looks out of place, and that is because the hair does not match. It is very shiny. Logan's hair is pretty blue, so let's do that first. I'm only applying this to the back half of his hair because the front half of the hair is usually a shade or 2 darker. I gotta be careful though, I don't want to ruin the face. Okay, I'm done. This turned out really cool. It looks very cel-shaded. It's perfect. Alright, here's Wolverine all finished. I am in love with it. It looks just like the Wolverine in my head. And the figure actually looks 2D. Except for the black areas around the eyes. For some reason, the black there isn't the smoothest. But the pointy eyes worked. I thought I would like the iconic masked head more, but I have to admit, this Logan head looks way more impressive. It makes the figure look even more cel-shaded somehow. There is a bit of dark smudge on his face. I was trying to clean up some black lines and it kinda stained the face. But I'm okay with it. It doesn't bother me. And just to demonstrate how 2D it looks, here's Wolverine with Gladiator Hulk. Look at that drastic difference. I can't believe how good Wolverine looks. This is a success. This is the best cel-shaded custom I've done. Not that I've done that many. Are there things that I think can be done better? Yes. Like the shading color I use for the yellow. In the show it's more orange, but I don't mind the color I used. It adds a bit of drama to the overall look. The other thing is that the claws are a bit too blue. When I mixed the colors, it didn't look this blue, but I still think the blue looks pretty cool too, like they just came out of his hands. I don't think pure white claws will look as good. Overall, this was a great experiment. Every time I do a 2D character, I feel a bit more confident. For me, there are certain things that must happen in order for the figure to look cel-shaded. 1. The entire figure must be matte. I cannot use any varnishes or paint that's glossy or shiny. That means no gold or silver paint. 2. The colors have to be at full opacity. No soft edges, no gradients, and the exact same shades all over. And 3. Most importantly, the cel-shading should blend into the figure rather than sticking out. I know it's cel-shaded, but I also don't notice it, if that makes sense. The cel-shading on the arms are questionable up close, but when looking at it as a whole, I don't notice them. I am still struggling with the thin black lines though. On one hand, they do enhance the 2D look, but on the other hand, it is very challenging to do, and it's impossible to add outlines to everything. So I'm still figuring out how much black lines to add. Alright, let's end this for the photo shoot. This Wolverine looks so good in photos. He is quite easy to pose, and he actually looks hand-drawn in certain poses. The only thing I gotta watch out for are the hip joints. I just have to be careful when I'm bending the legs to avoid paint rub. Otherwise, I didn't really have any issues posing the figure. Oh, random. I think maybe the torso is too long. Sometimes he looks like he has too many abs. Anyway, what do you think? Do you like what I've done to Wolverine? Did I elevate the figure? Let me know down below. Give it a like and share this video if you think I did a good job. Subscribe to see more content like this. I may have more X-Men to do. And as always, stay inspired and I'll see you next week. I can make it, so can you.